Agriculture on the move.
Agricole mouvement.
Agriculture on the move.
Agricole en mouvement.
Agriculture on the move.
Agricole mouvement.
Agriculture on the move.
Agricole en mouvement.
Good day again, viewers, and welcome to the program Agriculture on the Move. My name is Phillip, your host. Today we are discussing wildlife in Saint Lucia. And when I say wildlife, I'm referring to animal wildlife in Saint Lucia. Without further ado, I would like to introduce you to my two guests. And to my immediate right is Mr. Alwin Dornelly, who is the Assistant Chief Forest Officer in the Forestry Division, and Mr. Pius Haynes next to him, who is the Senior Wildlife Conservation Officer, also attached to the Forestry Division. Welcome, gentlemen, to the program.
Thank you, Sydney.
Great. Alwin, I'll start with you. To give us the forestry's perspective of wildlife as a program in that unit.
Good morning to our listeners, and again, thank you, Sydney. In your opening statement, well, it's interesting that you specifically, looked at wildlife as animals, and which has been historically, how wildlife is defined, animals. But we are moving into a new era, new definitions, that we're seeing wildlife now is beginning to encompass plants, as well.
Okay.
But I must say that for the Forestry Department, the Wildlife Protection Act, that's what gives the department, its mandate. And even within the realms of the Wildlife Act, it's only animals that are defined as wildlife. So we will remove our focus, on plants, as you say, and our focus will be more on the animals, yes. So as I said, the Wildlife Protection Act gives the department, that mandate, to manage wildlife on the island. And that includes managing its habitat, as well. Wildlife, as we think of it, as is also defined in the Act, it's like every wildlife belongs to the state, and we can also make the distinction between, what is exotic and what is native. Exotic, wildlife has really no protection, under the Wildlife Act. And the Act has those three schedules, which Schedule 1, Schedule 2, Schedule 3. On the Schedule 1, the wildlife listed there are, completely protected all year round. On the Schedule 2, they are also protected, but you can have, for example, an open season, for them. But as of some years, we know that there has been this moratorium, on the harvesting or hunting of any wildlife. So as it stands today, that still stands, that there is no permitting of hunting, of wildlife.
Okay.
On the Schedule 3, we have unprotected wildlife. And unprotected in the sense, and we only have 4 species there. The mongoose, rats, the mice, and well, for us now, unfortunately, the Saint Lucia ferdinand is also listed as unprotected. But unprotected in the sense that if you are found, or if you were to kill that wildlife, really and truly the law will not penalize you. But if you were to keep, that wildlife in your possession, then you would need a permit to still keep that unprotected wildlife.
Okay.
And particularly for the Saint Lucia furdilas, I mean, we pay less attention to maybe people having rats or mice. But if they do have the furdilas in their possession, they would need to have a permit from the forestry department to allow that.
Okay.
Otherwise, the law can penalize you. You
Okay.
could be penalized for that.
Great. Okay.
Yes.
So that takes me to you, Pius. What's the role of the conservation officer or the wildlife conservation officer?
Right. So the wildlife conservation officer basically is the one who sees to the fact that the provisions and the regulations within the Wildlife Act are maintained and are kept. So we, in fact, our jurisdiction is throughout the country. We are not limited by a range of any sort, but then wherever the wildlife is, and we have a number of various wildlife habitats in Saint Lucia. So we as wildlife officers and also the forest officers are also regarded as wildlife officers in some regards, because we all have the mandate at the forestry division to manage and to protect, to conserve our wildlife. So we are to ensure that all the provisions of the Act are upheld lawfully. Also, we do a lot of reconnaissance, a lot of surveys and research that we conduct in the various wildlife habitats and so on. We also assist with a lot of education and awareness. We go to the schools and we inform students, also various communities on wildlife matters and wildlife in general and various species. There are times that we also have to enter into contracts and we have to engage, the public. Sometimes they come to us and we have to facilitate them. Some persons may want to open a private zoo, or they may want to hold or have have wildlife for private use, for entertainment, and for various reasons. So we have to engage them and ensure that they abide by the rules and the regulations. And so the work of the wildlife conservation officer is not limited by forestry ranges or zone, but it encompasses the whole country. And we are the ones, as been said by Alwin, with that legal mandate to go about protecting, managing, and conserving our wildlife on Saint Lucia.
Okay. But then, you going back to the three-prong thing you mentioned,
The schedules.
the schedules. There are moratoriums on. Is it on all species? For example, I don't know whether you all also look at like the crustaceans, the crayfish in the rivers, and also around, as you know, we are all aware, the Junior Creoles. We have a lot of these wild meats are being served at those functions. Do you all carry out a survey to find out, yes, the agouti is being slaughtered? Do you all give permission? Or is there a moratorium on agouti, on also the wild pork and stuff like this?
Well, let me just define, in terms of the wild pork, because pigs would not be considered wildlife under the Act. Now, just for further clarity, the pigs or the kosher marron, or what we'll also call feral pigs, these are really domesticated animals
That run away.
And some of them have been on the loose or on the wild for centuries.
Yes.
So they redevelop some wild instincts. But any species of animal that has been domesticated, and not just the individual animals, or not just having them in your possession, but the entire species being domesticated, like cats, horses, goats, pigs, sheep. These are domesticated animals. If they go back into the wild, And the loose, we consider that as being feral or feral, and wildlife does not, our act does not include those, animals or those species as wildlife. So yes, people would be looking for the wild meat, the feral pigs, maniku. Well, for the feral pigs, we don't need any permits, for that, unless if you go into the forest reserve, where you would need our permission to enter, the forest reserve and things like that. With the agouti, the opossum.
Well, hold that point there. We do have our first break.
All right, thank you.
You're watching Agriculture on the Move. Stay tuned. We'll be back soon.
What is biodiversity?
When you look at biodiversity, it's all around.
I think of biological and I think of diversity.
What is biosafety?
Safety measures for our foods, our products, etc.
Biodiversity is the variety of life. Biosafety, on the other hand, involves the management of products of biotechnology, such as GMOs and LMOs. Biosafety seeks to protect Saint Lucia's biodiversity. The terms biodiversity and biosafety are not interchangeable. Get familiar with these terms. Observe the biodiversity around you, the changing environment of food production and sustainable growth. Do your part. Visit our websites and stay tuned to this station for more information on the National Biosafety Framework.
Welcome back to the program. Going back to you, Dornelly, the question of the agouti. I know at one point there was a move to have a wild meats night in Venus, in Millet, and they were trying to domesticate the agouti. Where's that program, and can you expound a little on that?
Well, that initiative, we were working with the Millet Development Committee. As a matter of fact, they had they've been supported by the Jeff Small Grants program. They needed our intervention and approval to start that. That program has not been successful, and for a number of reasons. Because we're going into an area where we call agouti, well, we're calling it agouti ranching, agouti farming. Agouti farming would be a better term,
right?
To use. The idea of ranching is like open space.
Open space, yes.
And that's not what we were doing. But to have one or two farmers have some agoutis in their possessions in captivity under conditions that will favor the animals, because you almost have to mimic the
wildlife to bring it to a domesticated environment.
Yes, that is a challenge. As well as to be able to monitor these programs, or to be able to have monitored that program successfully. So we had those challenges from the beginning, which in review we would have had to overcome, or at least try to overcome from the inception. And I think Pius and Neb did some work on the ground, so I don't know if he can also
So
speak
in
to that
speaking
too.
with two of the main farmers involved in this program, they were saying that one of the primary reasons the program failed was because they had not understood the basic lifestyle of the animal. They had not been successful at breeding the animal and getting the returns that they wanted on the investment. So the agouti would be there, and it would be just there feeding, not breeding. So they had gotten very low success with breeding, and as a result, that couldn't have sustained the program. So it has to bring us back to the drawing board, where we have to kind of like learn the husbandry practices of the animal. We have to learn a lot more about the species, because in the wild, they're in the natural environment, so they live life. But in captivity, it's a whole different ball game, and that is what we have to understand.
But you mentioned earlier that you'll have constant surveillance, and of course you'll let it get in data, all right, to understand all the wildlife species on island. Tell us about the threats those species are up to?
Well, not really all the wildlife, but then we do not have the resources always to conduct surveys on all the various species we have. Saint Lucia, we have a lot of different animal species, reed birds and reptiles. We have some mammals and so on. So there are a lot of different species of wildlife. We have been focusing a lot on the birds and also the reptiles, like the Saint Lucia iguana, also the Saint Lucia racer that we have on Maria Island, and the Saint Lucia boa and the featherless and so on, the thread snake. We have been focusing a lot on these two species, but we need to delve more into others like the agouti, get a sense of the population that is out there, whether it's expanding. Also the Saint Lucia parrot, we need to do more recent research in that regard. We've done a lot of research in the Saint Lucia parrot, but not as recent as would have liked.
Okay.
So with regards to the threats that the animals face here in Saint Lucia, Saint Lucia is a very small island state, and by just mere virtue of its size, it is at risk. And now we live in an era of climate change and so on, that we have so many different things happening. So we have threats such like development, like conversion of lands into agriculture, intensive agriculture, also into residential developments and tourism and so on. So a lot of our habitats, Saint Lucia only has a set amount of land. Our land is finite. It is not an infinite resource. So then we have our habitats in different pockets of Saint Lucia, and sometimes they find themselves in private lands, and they get developed, whether for hotel development or residential complex or whatever. And we find that we're losing our wildlife in that regard, because once you lose the habitat, then you lose the wildlife.
Right.
So also we have a major issue with invasive alien species. That's one of the major threats that we face here in Saint Lucia. And we have a number of invasive animals that would not from Saint Lucia. They're not indigenous, they're not endemic, they're coming from overseas. As you mentioned, we call them exotics. And we have a number of them introducing and being spread around the place. And it's a big challenge to control and to manage these species.
Yeah.
So that is a major threat. We also have, the threat of, you have natural disasters.
Yes.
And now, you find that those natural disasters are more frequent, more intense in their strength and so on. And so, if we had a case like Hurricane Maria, we could see what it did to Dominica and how it devastated the forests and, the
flora
national
and fauna,
bird and the flora and the fauna got devastated. Yeah. So that is a major threat to us. And also, among the other natural disasters, we may have fires, like in the dry forest areas, because we have not only rainforest as one of our main habitats, we also have the dry forest.
Right.
And like Maria Islands, for example, it's more like a coastal dry forest vegetation type. And if we have a fire there, one major fire could just take away all the racers we have, then that's it.
That's it, yeah.
Yeah, so we have a number of risks, but these are some of the major ones.
Okay. I remember years ago growing up, I don't know if this is still on the books, where people would kill the featherless and bring their heads to the nearest police station, and then paid a fee. Where's this? Is that still on the books?
Well, that was a policy a long time ago. It is not in our books as we speak, but the department has the authority to manage, in various ways. And if it is determined that there is some species that you need to put a bounty on, for example, then we can recommend, to do that.
Okay.
I wanted to also make a distinction when Pius talk about the exotics, because some people do think that, for example, the birds, the migratory birds that are coming into the island at different times of the year, these are also native species.
Yeah, because
we don't consider them as exotics because they are migrating to parts of the range.
Yeah.
Right. So that includes, could be from North America down to Saint Lucia, down to South America. So that entire
area
it's
the range,
part
is
of
the
the
zone,
natural
is
range.
natural habitat. Yeah.
You know, it's just using its entire range to
Yeah.
fulfill
Its life
various, you know, life cycle
Yeah.
events.
Right,
you
right,
know,
right.
So
Very
that,
good.
that's important.
Well done. Okay,
But
hold a point there. We'll come back to that. You're watching again Agriculture on the Move. Stay tuned.
Yeah.
Bio means life. Biodiversity is the variety of life all around us. All plants, animals, and microbes, and the places where they live. We need to protect biodiversity so that we can continue to enjoy all the resources it provides. Fresh air, clean water, food, clothing, shelter, and recreation. Biosafety ensures that we protect biodiversity against any negative impacts of GMOs while using it safely for national development.
For more information on the Biosafety Project and how you can be involved, call 451-8746 or 722-9252. Log on to lc.biosafetyclearinghouse.net or join the mailing list slubiosafety@govt.lc.
Welcome back. Gentlemen, I remember years ago there was a lively zoo at Union, and there was also a conservation center. But I heard there's a new development. Tell us about the new conservation center and the new development at the forestry unit at Union.
Well, as you rightly say, we had the zoo, a small collection of mostly our native wildlife. And predominantly that aspect of our wildlife management has been to help with our awareness, education and awareness. So we had lots of visitors, and when I say visitors, local, you know, the schools would come, you know, to the zoo. It was also part of we had made it part of the trail, the nature trail system. So the entire thing would have been, after a while, it just came to be, you know, like just one component with the zoo part and also with the trail. What we recently wanted to do is to upskill, you know, that effort. Upskill our awareness and education. And also, you know, around the world, the idea of zoos, you know, are shifting. The concept of having, you know, animals in captivity, different views and feelings. I mean, some persons are very passionate about wildlife, about animals, about keeping animals, and you would want to give them just what they would require out in the wild, you know, if you have them in captivity. Some persons would not want to have them in captivity at all. Let's show you how, you know, not just sympathetic, but how strong that passion is, you know, for wildlife. So what we were seeking to do is to upscale, you know, our awareness of particularly our native species, you know, with some of the animals that we could keep, you know, in that confined space, but to create a more open, you know, space for them, and to upgrade, you know, the facilities that we have there. So we came up with, you know, this nice term in terms of the wildlife conservation.